today we have some squeaky brakes on a 09 Ford Escape, so I figured I'd do a video showing the points to lubricate on here and clean up whenever you have a squeaky brake concern like this. Now this type of concern is where the pads themselves have plenty of meat to them, but the pads themselves are starting to squeak, or the metal contact points on here. If you have, worn brakes to the point where the squealers are working and touching and contacting, obviously it's time to do a brake job. This one's got about 40,000 on it. It's got some life left to it, but it squeaks at times. So let's go ahead and I'll show you a few places to lubricate and clean up on here. And then the most important aspect that no one really talks about is renewing the pads. Okay, and I'll show you how to do that also. That's very, very important to get the glaze off the pads to stop the squeaking. So once you have your vehicle jacked up safely, wheel off, we can go ahead and start pulling the caliper off of here. Now it's going to vary year to year, but there's generally caliper slide pins on the back side here, top and bottom, that bolt it to the caliper bracket itself. And then on some models, like the Expedition, F-150, and the Escapes, they'll have an anti-rattle clip on the outside here that you got to take off also. Now there is a method to getting these anti-rattle clips off without them flying across the room. What I use is a cat claw. Of course, you guys know I use it for everything. And then a pair of channel locks. We'll compress it, and then we'll pop it out of its hook, and it'll slowly come off there this way. So we'll go ahead and we'll compress it like so. Stick this right into there. Okay, you can see we're getting out of the hook there, and it kind of just falls out at that point. So we'll get that off if you have it, and then we'll go over here to the back side to those caliper slide pins like I talked about. Now this one has boots, these little caps that cover them. Take those off, they'll be hidden behind there. And most of them use Allens on the back side here, kind of like this right here. I got an Allen wrench, but they're Allen sockets. Almost all the Ford lineup is a 7mm, whereas the Escapes, I think just the 09 model year is a 9mm. Really odd size, so make sure you have it on hand if you have a Ford Escape. At that point, you simply loosen them, get it in there. Okay, top and bottom, and then they simply come right out. And these will generally stick in the boots themselves, so you just kind of push them back. You'll see the threads like so, and you'll see them sticking out right there, and the same thing in the bottom. And we'll get those out of the way off to the side. That's going to be one of our lubrication points. Now as we're taking them off, we're going to go ahead and take a paper towel or a shop rag and start cleaning off the old grease on there. Get the grease off first. Okay, dirt. And then we'll go ahead and bust out, you guessed it, brake clean, and spray them down. Get them all cleaned up. Okay, and off to the side. The same thing with your anti-rattle clip if you have it. Now generally at this point the caliper will basically come right off of here, but what you may notice, especially if you have some mileage and we're renewing the brakes like I was talking about, cleaning them up, lubricating them, stuff like that, there's a rust ridge on the edge of the rotor, so it's hard to get past there. So it's a good idea to not ruin your pads or the shims on the back side of the pads, and go ahead and just compress it in a little bit with the C-clamp, or I use a wood clamp. Just a couple turns like that. That's all it requires. And this will come right off. And for a cleaning like this, I'll just put it on top like that. Let's get our other piece of friction material out of the way, and you'll see why. Look at right here, you can see it's just packed in there with friction material from the years. So we'll go ahead and get the other pad off of here. Okay, out of the way with the other one. Next, you want to clean the caliper itself. the piston face here and the ears right here on the back side here of corrosion and grease. So there's probably gonna be grease on there from the last brake job. So let's go ahead and spray it off with some brake clean. You're gonna wanna spray down and away from the piston seal here, the dust boot, so nothing gets behind there. And the ears, and then we'll go ahead and clean it off on there. And the reason why we do it off to the side here is so we don't get it all over our rotor. Now this one is not rusty on the back side of the ears here or the piston, because the piston is actually plastic on this one. Now is a good time to check to make sure there's no cracks. The plastic pistons crack a lot, so you want to make sure you check that while you're in here. And then if there is any corrosion, you want to clean it with a wire brush on the back side of the ears here. Let's get the large amount of corrosion off of there so we're good to go going back in. Once again with the brake clean, go ahead and clean it off real nice here. Throw it back up top there so it holds. Now the other place where you can get a brake squeak noise is from the metal to metal contact right here in this guide of the caliper bracket. This is where the pads lie. So the pads, of course, are going to be subject to the heat and the vibration and all that, and it's a good point for them to move just enough to cause that squeak noise. So for me, I go the extra mile always if you're going this far in, and we'll go ahead and pull this bracket off. Now the way these bolt on to the knuckle themselves is two bolts right here on the back side. They're generally either a 15 millimeter or an 18 millimeter on Fords. Let's go ahead and take those off. Okay, keep them off to the side, and the whole bracket comes right off. Now when cleaning up the caliper bracket, the areas you want to concentrate on is the guide itself, where the pad slides and moves around in there. We're going to clean that up and then lubricate it in the end. And then also on the back side here, for those of you out there that have that the Antirattle clip on there, you'll see there's a shiny spot right here and here. Okay, well, you want to clean that area also, and then we're going to lubricate that in the end. That's where that anti-rattle clip and all that tension rides, and that can cause noise also. So let's go ahead and get that cleaned up. And the reason why I use a wire brush in most situations is because if you start using the die grinder wheel and all that stuff to clean up all this stuff on here, you can take away too much material on there, and then you put your pads back and everything feels good, loosey-goosey, right? You go to drive and you go forward, there's a clunk. And you go in reverse, hit the brakes, there's a clunk. That's because there's too much slack inside it here now. So you don't want to take away too much material. If you can, use a wire brush on here. And then we'll finish it off with some brake clean. Really clean these areas up. Here. Make it like new, put it off to the side, and then we'll lubricate everything at the end. Okay, now like I said, this is the most important part of a job like this where you're renewing the brake components and trying to get rid of a squeal. It's sanding the pad itself, okay? Make sure your hands are nice and clean, okay? You don't want to contaminate the surface on there. And what we're going to do is, you see a slot right here in the center, we're going to clean that out with our screwdriver. And what this does is it collects the pad material as it wears off, gives it a place to go, and allows the gases, the hot gases, to escape when you're braking. Now, we'll clean this out. Okay, we're good to go. Right now is a really good time with that glaze on there, see that glaze? Okay, to look for cracks. Cracks can cause moaning, groaning type noises, and squeaks even I've seen in certain situations. In drum brakes, just as a note here, I've seen them lock up the rear drum brakes, even the fronts too, with cracks in them like that. So it's something to look for while you have it like this. Okay, our channel's all cleaned up. Okay, and the next thing we're going to do is use a sanding disc like this, and we're going to use light pressure at a high speed and keep moving across the face of the pad. What that's going to do is get rid of this glaze on here and bring it back down to fresh pad material. The point is to move, keep moving, and have light pressure on here. Now some guys, they use a sanding block and like 80 grit sandpaper and they'll go across it. Okay, you can do that also, but for me, with skill, you can do this with a sanding disc and it'll be just fine. Get your chamfers on here. And there you go. It's like new. Now what I usually do, of course it's a good idea to wear a dust mask when you're doing this, is I'll actually blow it out. Get all that fine dust out of there and get a better idea on the condition of the pad. Okay. Like I said, light pressure, and we'll just get the glaze off of here, nice and even. There it is. Look at that, it's like brand new. Now at this point, one last cleaning with air. And then we're going to clean the back side of this, okay, with some brake clean on a rag. Just shoot it on the rag. And then we're going to get off the old grease and dirt in the back side of the pad itself. Just stay away from the front side, the friction side on there. We'll get this all cleaned up. And then the one last thing I'll do is I'll spray the friction material itself with some brake clean. But I won't touch it with a rag. I'll actually use air. And that right there is a finished product. It's almost like new. You got to remember, yeah, this is not ideal, but we're only renewing the components on here. We're not doing a brake job this way. Okay, that's what you got to realize. We're only taking off the light coat on top, the glaze, to get it off of there. And here you can see the difference between the two of them. So go ahead and repeat the same procedure for this one. Alright, now that all our brake components are cleaned up and ready to go, we can go ahead and start lubricating them and reassembling. It's that simple. Now there's a few different greases out there that I recommend, and the number one is the Motorcraft XG3A. It's a silicone grease made just for brakes and tune-ups, but it's extra thick compared to like Permatex and other brands out there, so it really sticks and holds. I use it for everything, the guide pins, the caliper, the guides themselves, and the Caliper Bracket, everything, okay? A lot of guys, though, they swear by this Permatex extreme ceramic lubricant. It doesn't wash off, stays on there, all that good stuff, high heat, doesn't melt off. So either way, you can use either one. They're both really good products, but for the guide pins themselves, these ones right here, they're going through the rubber on the caliper itself, so you want to use the silicone grease for that. So it's up to you. Now, on the caliper itself, I'll be doing this left-handed, so don't laugh. Grease, right? You want to apply it to the face of the piston here. Okay, nice thick coat on there. Get it nice and on there, nice and even. Okay, but also the back side of the ears back here. Again, a nice thick coat on here. And the back side of the ears on there. And put that to the side. She's ready to go. The same thing on your caliper bracket, okay? You want to put that grease right here in the guides where the pad rides back and forth and vibrates in there. So we'll go ahead and put that on there. Again, just coat this just enough because it does ride next to the rotor. Coat it enough so that's lubricated. But you don't want too much on here because it can get on the rotor. So we'll just get it all inside of here. Nice coating, and then we'll go ahead and even it out with our finger. Okay, both sides. And then the inside here where the rotor rides, right in there, close proximity, we'll go ahead with our finger and wipe off the excess so it's not globbing over onto the rotor. This is ready. Now if you do have the style like I have, where I have that anti-rattle clip, where's it at? This thing. Like I said, F-150s, Expeditions, allow them to use it. And this is an Escape. Where it rides back here, I showed you earlier, those shiny spots, same thing, grease. The last component we need to lubricate is the caliper guide pins themselves. Remember, use the XG3A silicone brake grease as it's going into the rubber boots on there, so it's compatible. And you just put a glob on your finger and roll it around the outside of it there. Just don't get it on the threads. Put those off to the side. Alright, let's start the reassembly. Now we're going to go ahead and take our clean and lubricated components and start putting them back on, starting with the caliper bracket itself. So we'll go ahead, we'll get that lined up on here. Just make sure you don't get any grease on there. And then you're going to have two bolts on the back side that hold that bracket to the knuckle itself. You're going to want to make sure you put blue Loctite on there so it holds it in place. It doesn't vibrate off that way. And then you simply bolt it up. And we'll snug it down. Now the one critical component on here to torque down is these two bolts right here for the caliper bracket. You're going to have to find the specs on your actual vehicle you're working on, but in general the cars are around 85 foot-pounds and the trucks are 135, and like Super Duties are like 165. But definitely get the specs for your vehicle you're working on. Also, once this bracket is on here, it has grease on it, right? So you want to make sure while you're putting it on there, nothing touched the rotor surface. So just go ahead and spin the rotor a little bit, and you can look at it, both sides, and make sure there's no grease on there. Now the torque spec on this 09 Escape is 130 foot-pounds. Alright, next we're going to go ahead and put our brake pads back on that we renewed. So we're going to go ahead and put them back into place. Depending on your model, they may clip in like this, or they might just go right into the bracket. This one has a little of both. Go ahead and put that in place. And all the lubricants are already on the caliper itself, so we're ready to go. We can go ahead and just set it into place on here. just like that. Caliper guide pins back into place, pushing through the boot until you contact the knuckle. Like so. And then no matter what, I recommend tightening these by hand because they can easily cross thread going into here. If you do it by hand, you can feel easily if they're cross threading or not. They should go in real easy like this all the way till they bottom out like so. Now there is a torque spec on these, and it's generally around 30 to 40 foot-pounds. Okay, that's pretty much across the board. Dust caps back on if you got them, and that'll complete that. Everything's nice and secure to the caliper bracket and to the knuckle at this point. Generally, if you don't have this style with the anti-rattle clip on the outside, you're done. You'll be able to tell every vehicle is different, but it's basically the reverse of removal. Now, like I said, on this side we have the grease over here, and the reason being is because when this goes into here, it puts all that pressure against that point right there. So squeaky deaky back and forth, right? You get the point. Now there is a method to putting these back in without killing yourself. Generally what I do is I'll go in this side, you hook behind here, okay, get it hooked in there, and then you can bring this side around this ear on here on the escapes. If you're strong, you probably do the same thing on the Expeditions and the F-150s. And then you simply squeeze with this side and push it back in. Like so, okay? And it's that simple. If you have you're having a problem with it, same thing, you get it behind there, you hold it so it can't pop out on you, okay? And then you take your channel locks once again to compress it and get it behind. Once behind, I like to give it a little tap with a hammer preferably, and make sure it's fully locked in there. Now at this point, it's complete, okay? Put your wheel back on, torque to spec, all that good stuff. What you gotta realize, you wanna start your vehicle and press your brake pedal a couple times with the vehicle running until you get that nice hard pedal. It's just like we did a brake job. Caliper's been compressed and all that good stuff, and it's gonna have to take up that space in there now. So get a nice firm pedal before you ever pull it out of park. Now when you go for your test drive after doing this kind of repair, it's the same thing as if you did a brake job, okay? All new pads, all new rotors. You want to bed the pads to the rotor. So you want to treat it the same and do the burnishing in process. If you don't know how to do that, I have a few best practices I show, and I have a video on that I'll link down below.